All right. Well, good afternoon. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this session titled State of Readiness for Cloud Data Management and Governance in the Financial Services Industry. My name is Peter Koop, Vice President and Chief Industry Strategist for Informatica's banking, financial services, and insurance sector. We have a tight agenda today, but I do want to kind of set the stage before we get to our panelists here. I think everyone, obviously, on the call today, throughout these sessions, we've been talking about cloud modernization, cloud readiness, cloud data governance, privacy management, CDMC. If you think about cloud adoption in 2021 last year, according to a recent Flexera study, 72% of organizations that were surveyed have a cloud-first strategy. 80% have multiple cloud providers, as we heard from the hyperscalers earlier in the session. 68% see on-premise and cloud coexisting. I think that's obviously true in the financial services sector. As companies are modernizing to the cloud, a lot of the legacy technologies, unfortunately, will remain, and they have a purpose for these organizations as they are core to running their businesses. And of course, 70% of sensitive data will be in the cloud, either created, stored, processed, consumed. So organizations have a lot in front of them. And cloud adoption in financial services is nothing new. There's obviously some significant benefits adopting a scalable, consumable operating model. 60% of organizations see the benefits as being demand scalability, 51% new capabilities, because a lot of the innovation is coming from the cloud, and 44% enables innovation, not just for them, but for their customers and employees as well. There are some concerns out there from a compliance standpoint. We're going to talk much about that during the panel today. Cloud expertise, cultural readiness. I remember 5-7 years ago, the topic of cloud adoption was somewhat taboo because of the data privacy and security concerns. You don't hear that much these days, right? And organizations out there are concerned of being locked into a third-party cloud provider, where in the past, they had the people, the operations, the data centers that they controlled. There are challenges out there. When we think about challenges in today's cloud hybrid environment, rationalizing and really understanding where is all that data. We heard about that throughout the conversations today regarding CDMC. Accessing, transforming, and integrating data to and from cloud to cloud, on-prem to cloud also remains a challenge. Quality errors, I'll tell you, just by modernizing to the cloud ecosystems and software as a service providers, your data quality issues do not go away. Understanding what data you have, the questions about how should you use it, who can you go to if you have questions. If the business organizations are adopting their own applications, who do you know that can answer questions related to the data that you depend on? Who's consuming it, for what purposes? And again, is it protected? Does it need to be protected? Now, Informatica has been a longtime EDM Council member. We're also proud to say that we are an authorized CDMC partner. You saw this in many of the sessions today. Informatica supports 13 out of the 14 CDMC categories. We do that across our portfolio. And there's a blog that I'll be sharing with all of you after this session, as we will send a thank you email to everyone that outlines our capabilities and aligning to the CDMC framework. Because Informatica has also been on a cloud journey. Our Intelligent Data Management Cloud platform provides capabilities to integrate not only data, but applications to help automate and scale data quality management through the adoption of AI and ML. Master data management, both in terms of customer data, reference data, and being able to provide that 360-degree view of customer that organizations require in order to improve customer experience and to grow wallet share. Cataloging, think of us as the catalog on top of catalogs, and governance and privacy is core to our existence. Everything that we offer is sold standalone, but really the value of Informatica is that the products actually work together as a proper platform to support the cloud investments that organizations are making today and in the future, as well as leveraging the systems and applications that your businesses have been running on for years. Now, we're pretty proud of the fact that we are recognized as the leader in 5 Magic Quadrants, according to Gartner. And you want to be in the upper right-hand quadrant, especially when you're betting your business and your success on leveraging data as a business asset. There are questions that come about that we hear every day. We hear this throughout the conference today. How do we reduce the risk of these cloud investments from failing the business? Just because you have a new data lake in the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that the problems with the old data lakes or the data stores go away instantaneously. Now, have you done enough from a data perspective? We're going to get into that with the panel that we have here today. Where else do we need to invest to ensure that your cloud investments actually perform? And then if not, what's missing and what's required going forward? I want to introduce our panelists. We have Wes Anderson, Head of Enterprise Data Management at TD Bank. Arvid Jagannathan, who's the Chief Data Officer for Freddie Mac. Robert, hopefully you have joined us and your firewall issues have gone away, and let's make sure that they do, but hopefully you'll join. Robert Wentz, Managing Director from KPMG. And of course, Mr. John Petega, President of the EDM Council. Gentlemen, how are you?
Doing great, Peter. Thank you.
Good.
Great. So it looks like Rob will do his best to join here. I tell you, it's a lot better than what it was back in December. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for making it. As we were preparing for this session, there's a lot of cloud offerings in the market, from infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And cloud really represents a wide range of options and investments for many organizations. But to really hit it home, what have your organizations invested in as it relates to cloud modernization? I guess we'll start with you, Wes.
Yeah, so I think all of the above is a fair response to that. We definitely see across the industry, lots of adoption of software as a service. And so when you think about, you highlighted a couple of the examples we're all getting more and more familiar with, the Workdays of the world, the ServiceNows, SAP, Ariba, all these things that we use in the enterprise that have moved from an on-premise solution to a cloud offering as software as a service, as opposed to us managing that infrastructure. When you look at the data space, you think about the Snowflakes of the world, Azure Synapse, Databricks. Those are replacing a lot of these traditional on-premise data marts, data warehouses, where we have built a lot of our data ecosystem. And so, how do you manage all of this across that ecosystem? But I think that's where a lot of that additional investment is starting to funnel into. Lastly, you start thinking about the data management capabilities, right? We got to be able to manage all this stuff in the cloud. So you start seeing investments in more and more data cataloging capability to be able to manage all of that data across software as a service and the various data platforms that are cropping up.
How about you, Jag, at Freddie Mac? Where does cloud sit across your enterprise?
So I was laughing with Wes. I think we pay everybody. So, in terms of, if I think about going from legacy to the cloud, you first started as an infrastructure play. So, you try to get that going. But then you're seeing, as I think Wes just was highlighting, how do you take your services, whether it be your Salesforce or Workday, and move that out? Payment modernization is something that's also, started, because you have to think about that entire ecosystem. But what I'm seeing now is clearly more investments on the integration side. So as we've spoken, Peter, in terms of going to next gen, you had something that was sitting in legacy. How are you going to take all what I call your defensive and offensive capabilities from governance and lineage and business clustering? How are you going to move that into this new ecosystem? There's new tools, new capabilities, but it takes up a lot of investment. So I see if the last 2 years was heavy investment getting the foundational build, what we're doing now in 22, and I'm seeing it's going to be a multi-year journey, is around integration and how you're going to get all these components tied together while you're still feeding and carrying your legacy. Because as much as quick we want to do it, it's going to take time in terms of how to make sure your producers and consumptions are all tied together.
Now, I used the word taboo earlier, and I was this morning reading an article that was actually dated 2014, and it was a topic of cloud investments. And there was this sentiment that, oh my gosh, why would you want to move your core banking system or your payment system or your HR or financial systems into the cloud? The word taboo, I think, was really a reflection of concerns with regard to security and privacy and all of the above. When did that change? I know, hey, Rob, you made it. The firewalls are finally let down. Thank you for joining. We're just getting started, by the way. When did that change? The taboo no longer being associated with the word cloud. I'm curious. I know We didn't include this in the original Q&A, but I wanted to bring it up because I think people take it for granted that cloud is now the thing that everyone's talking about.
Peter, let me jump in on that if I can. Peter, just a quick, having worked for the government, probably that was the biggest place that cloud was taboo, right? For the reasons that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. But you have to give credit to the capabilities of cloud offerings now. The level of security, the level of uptime it surpasses on-prem and even local cloud environments. So you've seen that thawing in the government space, mm-hmm. and I think that's a good kind of a thermometer check, if you will, of the industry. If the government is going to see the benefits of it, you're going to see private sector jump on it too. And I think that's what we've seen.
So Rob, first of all, thank you for joining right at the nick of time. We've been talking about data governance here, and we talk about data governance literally day in, day out. I think my children now can actually regurgitate what data governance means, given that they hear so much of me on these Zoom sessions. But data governance is really nothing new in financial services. Many organizations, those here represented, have formal data governance programs that are repeatable. People have roles and responsibilities. Given the level of maturity in financial services today versus, let's say, 5-8 years ago, is the industry in a safe place as they continue to invest in more modern, available cloud solutions to support their business?
So thanks. I finally got joined. I ended up having to join on my mobile phone. But anyway, to your question, I would actually suggest, yes, there's been a lot of progress made, a lot of advancements made. But what's happening is a lot of change is getting introduced as well. So there's a level of risk with that change. There's also that nagging, ongoing, changing regulatory environment that you have to be aware of as well. So I think a lot of the organizations have the platform that they can react effectively to this, but I don't think it's done yet. It'll probably never really be done. But with the introduction of the cloud, I think it's actually introducing a lot of different risk. And as people migrate from that more traditional environment to the cloud environment, those risks have to be addressed. So to your question of safety, I wouldn't say it's done yet. It's just going to continue to evolve. And as long as you have the platform and that governance model to manage it, you can effectively get through it.
Any thoughts on that, Arvind?
Yeah, I mean, just piggyback on what Rob just said, if you take the information risk landscape, I think that's always going to be evolving. So whether, I'm just using terms of whether you're conservative or adverse. And I think what you're seeing now more from a regulatory, and I think companies are becoming more conservative, more adverse in terms of looking at from a governance and a cloud perspective. Clearly, when you look at the tools embedded and leveraging lineage, glossary, quality, overall architecture, there's a lot of benefit in terms of automation around the cloud. I think where the challenges are coming in is, as data professionals, it's greater awareness on identification, how sensitive is the data, how we're going to be managing it in this infrastructure. And you got to make sure you're providing that care and feeding initially before you create other challenges. Because in this environment, people don't want, whether it be from a regulatory or internal board standpoint, those issues. And next, I would say the other is also, it's more than technology. And something I think we'll talk as we go further. It's also your cultural and people and process change. Because I think we all start with the technology, and then you quickly realize how I'm having to work and how I'm going to connect. The process has to change and create a different mindset in terms of where you are. So those are some of the challenges, I think, as we go into the future state.
Any closing thoughts on that, Wes?
Yeah, I think I would just add, thinking about it from a scalability and a life cycle perspective. So you guys highlighted the regulatory aspects of how that's helping drive adoption. We think about historically, as data governance programs got stood up, we want to identify, hey, what's our most critical data? And narrowing the scope down to a subset of our data, because we didn't have the tools to manage everything the way we want to, and we got to start somewhere. But I think as the landscape has evolved, we need to be able to scale that out to a much broader set of data than what we historically have had to manage. And so you start thinking about, well, what tools are available to scale to all of my data or the preponderance of my data as opposed to what's critical. And then thinking about how we're managing that through the life cycle all the way to, getting rid of data. We don't historically do a great job of getting to that endpoint of retiring data. And as we move to the cloud, now I can store that forever if I want to. Is that what I want to, or do we need to have, the appropriate processes and tools to be able to manage that through that end state?
So let's drill down a little bit on that and separate data management from data governance for a moment, because you talked about some important points there in terms of data retention. Does cheaper storage mean you want to save everything forever? And of course, when you get that MRA and that audit, you probably wish you got rid of it right at some point. As data management professionals, what are the top 3 areas organizations need to prepare for as they are investing more in cloud solutions? Rob.
So I think as you look at the migration to the cloud, and relative to the things that you have to manage that are different, I think the investments that you have to consider are the variety of options that do exist in the cloud. So you've got to be able to understand and manage, and that's the pure technology side of it. But as you start to look at the refined process of data management, what you start to realize that it's not all just a technology problem, or it's not one technology problem. There's a number of technologies that need to be orchestrated and coordinated in order to better truly manage the data, right? So you have catalog tools, you have lineage tools, you have the repositories themselves. They all have to be coordinated in order to orchestrate proper data management, again, outside of the data governance function. So it's not a silver bullet, and that environment as well is constantly changing. So tools and technology are rapidly migrating and emerging in that environment. And as a result, you've got to think about how you do good data management as these things are migrating and changing.
John, any perspective on that?
Yeah, Peter, I think I think of it as 3 prongs. One, absolutely what was just said was if you don't manage your data properly, it's still going to be managed poorly in cloud. Right. So, Rob, you're spot on. We have to have the skill set of managing information and now transfer that into a cloud environment. But the other 2 things I think are important are, the other one is obvious, the infrastructure. It is a different infrastructure, which requires a different perspective and skill set. But what I think firms are maybe not paying attention enough is, what are the opportunities that cloud provides? So there's kind of like the art of the possible has to be thrown into that mix, right? To leverage cloud, how it can be used to advance the businesses, make sure the infrastructure is in place, make sure you manage data properly. I see that as the things that companies have to start thinking about when they start moving to cloud.
Yeah, I can tell you, my youngest is actually learning how to code in Python, believe it or not. Right? She's studying data science at UChicago. And I started thinking about the data management profession, specifically in the financial services industry. We're all getting older, and the younger generation aren't necessarily picking up the knowledge and the skills. And are we really documenting and training and doing that proper knowledge transfer? I think that's an area that organizations will need to consider, because with cloud, you have more rapid consumption cycles with new technologies. It's easier to go out and get that next system and application. But the fundamentals of proper data management and data governance, we're all here because we have the battle scars to show what we've done in our careers. Are your organizations preparing the younger generation coming into your companies the fundamentals of managing and governing data? And do you see them coming in with some of the training necessary to get started quicker rather than really starting from scratch, if that makes sense? Jay?
I think it involves, as you talk about training and commitment, indicating again what the value prop is. So, I know it's not a topic for this conversation, but if you think about the marketplace and attrition, guess what? As you said, kids, in college and high school are learning Python and figuring out that's what they want to do. So the cultural change and you think about your people strategy is equally important. in terms of how you got to retain and figure out that value prop. If I just go back and just piggyback on a couple of the other answers, as you think about the focus on the full cloud potential and on the technology, it's more than just the data piece. It's also the application piece. It's the entire ecosystem to unlock what John was highlighting. What is the art of the possible? And then it requires that, I call that customer experience and really quantifying the value, because the challenge that I think we're all faced with is there's a lot of shiny new balls, and people want to always do the cool things. And then how do you got to put and prioritize and keep that with a clear value prop is something that I think we're going to have to continue to do, because otherwise you'll keep on spending dollars on something that really doesn't meet the customer or define capabilities.
Jack, if I could just jump in on that, and it's going to sound a little nerdy, but remember the transition from C to C++? Everybody went to C++ and still coded in C, right?
Yeah.
They never took advantage of the new capabilities. So I think we're seeing that. I think there's going to be a move in the cloud where they're going to still manage data the old way in cloud until they really recognize the capabilities that cloud provides. And maybe that's a natural progression, but firms should be thinking always, the old Gretzky thing about where the puck's going to be, right? Not where it is.
And I know, Wes, me saying this is sort of preaching to the choir here, but I think what we have to keep in mind also is companies need to really understand the importance of having good data management, as you mentioned earlier. And what I've seen over the years also is companies sometimes take that for granted and don't necessarily feel as though the people and the processes and the best practices, and of course the technologies, are as important as the new shiny application or the new shiny analytic platform, thinking that it's going to actually solve everything. In fact, going back to the Python example, they don't actually get the fact that it's rubbish in, rubbish out. As you talk to a modeler and a data scientist, what do you mean my models are bad? No, it's your data. And they actually spend more time fixing data problems than actually analyzing. So anyway, I want to switch gears a little bit. So John, we've been talking about the CDMC framework here. We were part of the effort since the beginning. There are a lot of different components of the framework that were being discussed. I'm curious, are there certain components of the framework that an organization should consider versus others? What are you seeing in terms of the adoption of the CDMC framework since it was released? And what have you learned so far?
So I'm looking at Rob, because Rob is probably smiling at that question as well. And I know we're going to be running out of time, so I'll answer quick. It's the links in the chain story, Peter. You could try to prioritize the elements within cloud, within CDMC, but if one of them is weak, you're risking the environment. I hate to say everything is a priority, but all of those elements need to be in place to assure that you've got the best chance at securing the information, leveraging it properly. So I would, blanketly say you have to get all of those capabilities in place to really provide that confidence and trust in the data and the environment.
Great. And Rob, I want to get your kind of perspective and how, for example, is your organization, KPMG, helping your clients with their requirements and learning how to really adopt CDMC to its full potential?
So I think the interesting thing in having been through some of the assessments on some of the initial parts of the CDMC framework, and helping develop some of the thought processes around how you go audit a function, right, within this environment, what you quickly come to find, there's a lot of assumptions that need to be made. There's a lot of core foundation, and those assumptions are around that core foundation type of information. So your traditional data management functions that need to exist. When you go into the cloud and you start looking at the secure data, which is the focus of CDMC, it requires a lot of pieces. It's not just the technology. It's all those other disciplines around the people, the process, and the technology, and those assumptions that need to get made that you have in place. So as we were doing some of our assessment, one of the questions we would always come back to is, well, we have to have, where's our governance model? So yeah, we can do all this whiz bang stuff with the technology in order to achieve that set of requirements that the framework has laid out that are good practice. But it makes the underlying assumptions that all your foundational components are in place. So it becomes this fundamental hybrid that you have to have the good disciplines, and that's where you really can't separate the governance and the data management disciplines, because they're one and the same. So that's what was interesting about going through the CDMC to me, was because, to your point, I'm not the Python guy. I'm not, I'm all around the discipline and how we keep it good and documented, all that kind of stuff. But it's required to have all those other disciplines to be successful, to achieve the requirements of the framework.
Any comments there, Jag, in terms of CDMC? Where do you start for people that are just starting their journey?
I mean, I think it being and supporting, again, as what we just heard, I think it provides that common tool set. So similar as we think about DCAM and then leveraging for CDMC. Ask questions. I think, we're all around, and I know with John's leadership with all the team, I think it's something that use it, and I think it's been well written and answers a lot of the questions. But guess what? We're not going to know it all. But I think at least having that common framework and the amount of efforts and throughput that we did, I think it's awesome that we were able to accomplish that, and great leadership by all those that led the various efforts.
Any closing thoughts there, Wes, as we wrap up this panel?
Yeah, I think the recommendation I would have is making sure we socialize it with the other key stakeholders in that framework, right? There's a privacy aspect, there's a data protection aspect. So how are we connecting with the other folks within the organization who are responsible for that or have a vested interest in how we're managing those components in the cloud? And so just making sure we're socializing with those folks.
Great. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up our panel. I want to thank again all of you for joining today. I know for the folks that were on the chat window asking questions, I did actually see that there were some folks that were answering those for you. If we did not get to your questions, we will do our best to respond offline. Michelle, I'm sharing my screen once again. So please, if you get a chance, visit us at informatica.com. And I just want to say, in terms of agenda reference here, I think 4:20 Eastern. So there are two concurrent sessions happening. Option one, which is which should I use, DCAM or CDMC? That's the one I'm going to be attending. Is it Ortega that will be leading that session? And then there's also Graph Platform Capability supporting ESG from E&Y. So again, thank you for attending today. Gentlemen, thank you again as always. Back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you, Peter.